In 1305 BC, somewhere along the banks of the Nile, an anonymous laborer sat in the shade beside a half-finished stone monument and reached into a woven basket for his midday meal. Bread, beer, and onion. He peeled away the dry outer skin with dirt still under his fingernails, split the bulb in half with a bronze knife, and ate it raw before returning to work beneath the Egyptian sun. He wasn't eating a delicacy, he wasn't following a ritual, he was eating one of the cheapest foods available. 3,300 years later, people would still be doing exactly the same thing. That is almost unheard of. Civilizations disappeared, languages vanished, religions rose and fell. Entire empires were buried beneath sand. Yet one of the world's oldest cultivated vegetables quietly survived them all, changing remarkably little while changing the history of food itself. Today, onions are so ordinary that most people never think about them. They disappear into soups before anyone notices. They caramelize beneath burgers. They melt into curries, stews, pasta sauces, and stir-fries until they almost cease to exist as an ingredient. We expect to find them in supermarkets every month of the year for just a few dollars a bag. But that kind of abundance is astonishing, because for thousands of years, onions were not simply another vegetable. They were survival. Think about that for a second. Very few crops managed to become essential to peasants and pharaohs, monks and merchants, emperors and soldiers, all at the same time. Wheat fed civilizations, rice sustained kingdoms, potatoes transformed Europe, but onions slipped quietly into almost every cuisine they encountered, becoming so familiar that history largely stopped talking about them. That may be their greatest achievement. Like many of humanity's oldest crops, the onion's beginnings are surprisingly difficult to pin down. Archaeologists, botanists, and historians broadly agree that the common onion, Allium cepa, was first domesticated somewhere across Central Asia, with regions extending from modern-day Iran through Turkmenistan and into western Pakistan, frequently proposed as its birthplace. Exactly where remains uncertain, and that uncertainty tells its own story. Unlike apples, whose wild ancestor still grows in the mountains of Kazakhstan, or maize, whose ancestry can be traced to the wild grass teosinte, the onion's direct wild ancestor has never been identified with complete confidence. By the time written history began, people had already been cultivating onions for so long that the original wild populations had either disappeared or become impossible to distinguish from their domesticated descendants. Humanity domesticated the onion so early that it erased the evidence. Long before villages became cities, wild members of the Allium family covered large parts of Eurasia. Some resembled modern onions, others looked more like garlic, leeks, or chives. Many were intensely pungent, some were barely edible. Hunter-gatherers almost certainly collected them wherever they appeared because they offered something surprisingly rare in the prehistoric world. They kept. Most wild foods demanded immediate attention. Berries fermented, mushrooms rotted, leaves wilted within hours, meat spoiled unless it was smoked or dried. Onion bulbs solved a problem that people had not yet learned to solve themselves. Buried beneath the soil, they naturally stored energy through harsh seasons. Once harvested, many remained edible for weeks or even months without any special preservation. It was an accidental food reserve. That mattered far more than flavor. As farming gradually spread across the Fertile Crescent and neighboring regions around 10,000 years ago, onions fit naturally into the first cultivated gardens. They tolerated difficult soils. They survived periods of drought better than many vegetables. Their seeds were easy to collect. Their bulbs could be replanted. Every harvest gave farmers another opportunity to choose slightly larger, sweeter, or more reliable plants for the following season. Nobody invented the onion. Millions of tiny decisions did. Generation after generation, anonymous farmers unknowingly became plant breeders. Without understanding genetics, they transformed a modest wild bulb into one of the world's first dependable vegetables. By the 3rd millennium BC, onions had already spread throughout much of the ancient Near East. They appeared beside lentils, barley, garlic, and leeks in some of the earliest agricultural societies. Merchants carried seeds between settlements. Farmers exchanged cultivation techniques. As irrigation expanded, so did the onion's range. Then it reached the civilization that would preserve its image for thousands of years. Ancient Egypt did not simply grow onions, it admired them. To Egyptian priests, the onion's perfectly nested rings appeared to symbolize eternity. One layer enclosed another without any obvious beginning or end, making the vegetable a natural emblem of endless life and rebirth. That symbolism found its way into religious practice. Archaeologists have discovered onions placed among funerary offerings, and in some burials they appear alongside the dead themselves, suggesting they held ritual significance beyond their everyday use. It is easy to dismiss that as superstition. It was also practical. The same vegetable carried into tombs was feeding the living every day. Classical writers later claimed that laborers building Egypt's great monuments received onions, garlic, and radishes as part of their provisions. The Roman historian Herodotus even described inscriptions recording enormous expenditures on those foods. Modern historians treat parts of his account cautiously, and some details remain debated, but there is little disagreement about the larger picture. Onions were deeply woven into Egyptian life. They appeared in kitchens, temple offerings, fields, and markets with remarkable consistency. Unlike luxury imports arriving from distant lands, onions belonged to everyone. A noble household could afford them. So could a stone mason. That universality made them unusually resilient. If one harvest failed in a village, another region could often supply it. If dynasties changed, onions remained. If political power shifted from one capital to another, farmers continued planting the same familiar bulbs because they required no decree from a king. History often celebrates the spectacular. The onion succeeded by being dependable, and that quiet dependability would soon carry it beyond the Nile, into the ports of the eastern Mediterranean, where merchants, sailors, and soldiers would introduce it to an empire that specialized in taking ordinary ideas and spreading them across the known world. In the 1st century AD, the Roman scholar Pliny the Elder sat down to catalog the natural world. His natural history attempted to describe everything from elephants to emeralds, volcanoes to vineyards. Tucked among those grand subjects was something almost laughably ordinary: the onion. Pliny didn't write about it because it was rare. He wrote about it because everyone knew it. By then, onions had become so deeply woven into daily life that Romans expected to find them wherever people settled. Farmers grew them from Britain to Egypt. Traders carried them between provinces. Cooks chopped them into stews. Physicians prescribed them for ailments according to the medical beliefs of the day. They had become part of the invisible machinery that kept an empire fed. That was Rome's greatest talent, not inventing ideas, standardizing them. At its height, the Roman Empire stretched across 3 continents and connected perhaps 60 to 70 million people under a single political system. Roads linked distant provinces. Merchant ships crossed the Mediterranean in every season the weather allowed. Grain poured into Rome from Egypt and North Africa. Olive oil arrived from Hispania. Wine flowed from Gaul. Onions moved with everything else. Unlike expensive spices from India or silk from China, onions did not travel as luxury cargo. They spread because Roman farmers planted them wherever new settlements appeared. Around forts, villas, and growing towns, gardens produced vegetables that could support local populations without relying entirely on imported food. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of cultivated onions at Roman military sites across Britain and continental Europe, showing that soldiers were not merely supplied from afar. They grew food close to where they served. That mattered. A legion stationed along Hadrian's Wall lived nearly 2,000 miles from the warm fields of Egypt. Grain could be shipped. Olive oil could be imported. Fresh vegetables were another problem entirely. The solution was simple: plant them. Roman military camps often became permanent communities. Roads attracted merchants. Merchants attracted families. Families planted gardens. Long after soldiers moved on, onions remained in the soil, becoming part of local agriculture. The empire conquered territories. The onion conquered diets. Pliny also observed something modern shoppers take for granted. Not all onions were the same. Different regions became known for producing different varieties, suggesting Roman agriculture had already begun selecting bulbs for size, flavor, and growing conditions. Farmers may not have understood heredity, but they understood results. If one field consistently produced sweeter onions or larger bulbs, those were the seeds worth saving. Agriculture became local science. Each harvest became an experiment. No single farmer noticed much change within a lifetime. A century later, the crop looked different. Rome rarely celebrated these quiet improvements. Historians wrote about emperors, generals, and civil wars. Farmers left few monuments behind, yet their work endured longer than most emperors' victories. When the Western Roman Empire gradually fragmented during the 5th century, imperial authority disappeared from much of Europe. Tax systems collapsed, roads deteriorated, cities shrank, long-distance trade became less reliable. The onion barely noticed. Villages still needed food, gardens still needed planting. Winter still came every year. Some of the empire's greatest achievements vanished within generations. Its vegetables did not. That survival owed much to institutions that few people would have expected: monasteries. Across medieval Europe, monks became custodians of practical knowledge. They copied ancient manuscripts by hand, preserved religious texts, experimented with medicinal herbs, and cultivated gardens that supplied their own communities as well as travelers and the poor. Those gardens were not designed to impress anyone. They were designed to feed people. Beans, cabbages, leeks, garlic, onions. The rule of Saint Benedict emphasized work alongside prayer, and tending gardens became part of daily monastic life. Medieval monastery plans, including the famous 9th century Plan of St. Gall, depict carefully organized garden spaces intended for vegetables, herbs, and medicinal plants. While no single monastery represented all of Europe, together they helped preserve agricultural practices through centuries of political instability. Outside monastery walls, onions remained equally important. By the High Middle Ages, they appeared regularly in town markets across England, France, the Holy Roman Empire, and northern Italy. Local authorities inspected weights and measures, regulated market days, and occasionally issued rules governing the sale of food. Bread received the greatest attention because it was life's staple. But vegetables, including onions, had become established commercial goods rather than crops grown only for household use. The onion had entered the cash economy. People paid for it, people traded it. Sometimes people even paid rent with agricultural produce that included vegetables alongside grain, poultry, or eggs, depending on local custom. It was no longer simply something dug from a garden. It was merchandise. Here is the strange part. While much of Western Europe struggled through periods of political fragmentation, agricultural knowledge flourished elsewhere. Across the Islamic world, scholars compiled detailed agricultural manuals describing soils, irrigation, grafting, crop rotation, and vegetable cultivation. Works such as Ibn al-Awam's 12th century Book of Agriculture gathered farming knowledge from across the Mediterranean, discussing onions alongside hundreds of other crops. These texts circulated practical ideas that influenced agriculture far beyond their place of origin. Knowledge continued moving, even when kingdoms did not. By the 15th century, onions had become one of the few vegetables recognized from Scotland to Persia. Different languages gave them different names. Different climates produced different varieties. Different cultures cooked them in completely different ways. The bulb remained the same. Nobody crossed an ocean searching for onions. But when the greatest voyages in history finally began, onions would be waiting on board every ship. The voyages that reshaped the world were driven by dreams of spices, precious metals, and new trade routes. School children remember Christopher Columbus crossing the Atlantic in 1492. They remember Vasco da Gama reaching India in 1498. They remember Ferdinand Magellan's expedition becoming the first to circumnavigate the globe. Almost nobody remembers what those crews were eating. Not because it wasn't important, because it was ordinary. Every ocean voyage depended on food that could survive months at sea. Fresh bread turned moldy. Meat spoiled unless it had been salted. Drinking water grew foul. Vegetables disappeared quickly unless they possessed one remarkable quality. The onion did. Once properly cured, onions could remain edible for weeks aboard a wooden ship. They required no barrels of brine, no smoking, no elaborate preservation. They occupied little space, added flavor to otherwise monotonous meals, and helped stretch whatever food remained when voyages lasted longer than expected. Captains loaded onions for the same reason they loaded fresh water, because crews needed them. Christopher Columbus almost certainly carried onions across the Atlantic during his voyages to the Caribbean. Spanish expeditions routinely packed familiar European crops alongside livestock and seeds intended for future settlements. Conquistadors searching for gold also carried vegetables. Empires were not built on treasure alone. They were built on supply lines. Wherever Spanish settlers established permanent colonies, gardens followed. Wheat struggled in tropical climates. European grapes often failed. Other familiar crops adapted slowly. The onion adapted almost immediately. Within decades, it was growing throughout New Spain, across the Caribbean, and in parts of South America. Portuguese settlers carried it to Brazil. Later, English, French, and Dutch colonists planted it wherever permanent settlements appeared. But there is an important correction to a story often told too simply. Europeans did not introduce people in the Americas to onions. They introduced their onion. Long before Columbus reached the Caribbean, indigenous peoples across North America gathered native wild onions belonging to the allium family. Species such as Allium canadense and Allium cernuum had been harvested for generations. They flavored meals, appeared in seasonal diets, and formed part of local ecological knowledge that stretched back centuries. The bulb onion from Eurasia was not replacing an unknown food. It was joining a much older family. That distinction matters. History often describes colonization as if knowledge traveled only in one direction. It rarely did. European settlers brought domesticated onions. Indigenous communities already understood wild alliums remarkably well. Over time, those traditions overlapped. Commercial agriculture increasingly favored the larger cultivated bulb because it produced predictable harvests and stored exceptionally well, while native species continued to be gathered in many regions for local use. The onion's greatest strength remained exactly what it had always been. It fit almost anywhere. Across southern Africa, European settlers planted onions in colonial gardens. Around trading posts on the West African coast, vegetables familiar to Europeans gradually appeared beside local crops. Mission stations established kitchen gardens wherever permanent communities emerged. In Australia and New Zealand, settlers carried onion seed almost as routinely as they carried wheat. The crop spread with settlement itself, not because it was fashionable, because it was useful. By the 18th century, onions had become one of the few vegetables recognized across Europe, North Africa, Western Asia, and much of the Americas. Every region developed its own preferences. Some favored pungent yellow storage onions, capable of lasting through harsh winters. Others selected sweeter varieties for immediate consumption. Red onions became especially popular in parts of the Mediterranean, while white onions found their place in other regional cuisines. None of this happened inside laboratories. Farmers accomplished it through patient selection. Each harvest answered the same question: which bulbs deserve to become next year's crop? Nobody knew the word genetics. They understood results. Centuries of quiet selection produced hundreds of locally adapted varieties, each reflecting the climate, soils, and tastes of the people who grew them. Then the 19th century arrived. Steam replaced sail. Railroads replaced wagons. Cities expanded at a pace the world had never seen before. For the first time in history, millions of people lived too far from farms to grow much of their own food. Feeding them would require agriculture to become something entirely different. It would require industry. The Industrial Revolution transformed almost every industry it touched. Farming was no exception. For thousands of years, growing onions had depended on the same basic formula: plant by hand, weed by hand, harvest by hand, dry them in the field, carry them to market. It worked. It just didn't scale. During the 19th century, Europe and North America urbanized at a breathtaking pace. London passed 2 million people. New York exploded into one of the world's fastest-growing cities. Chicago, barely more than a frontier settlement at the beginning of the century, became a metropolis before it ended. Cities could no longer feed themselves. They depended entirely on farmers living hundreds of miles away. That changed everything. Most vegetables were difficult to transport. Lettuce bruised easily. Spinach wilted within days. Tomatoes spoiled before reaching distant markets. Onions had already solved that problem thousands of years earlier. Their papery outer skin protected the bulb naturally. Properly cured onions could survive wagon rides, rail journeys, and weeks inside storage warehouses with remarkably little loss. The Industrial Revolution didn't make onions durable. It simply built a world that rewarded durability. One region demonstrated that better than almost anywhere else. Just north of New York City lay thousands of acres of marshland known as the Black Dirt region. Throughout the 19th century, Dutch engineers and local farmers drained the swamps by cutting an elaborate network of canals and ditches. What remained was an extraordinarily rich black soil formed by centuries of decaying vegetation. Most farmers saw swamp. Onion growers saw opportunity. The soil produced enormous bulbs with exceptional storage quality. By the late 19th century, trains regularly carried black dirt onions into New York City and beyond, feeding one of the fastest-growing urban populations on Earth. It became one of America's first truly specialized onion-growing regions. And it wasn't alone. Across Europe, farmers increasingly focused on crops best suited to their local climate and soils. Instead of every village producing a little of everything, entire districts began building reputations around particular vegetables. Agriculture became a business, not simply a way of life. Railroads accelerated the transformation. Before rail, vegetables were largely local. A farmer sold to nearby towns because transporting produce farther cost too much. Steel rails changed that equation almost overnight. A harvest picked in rural New York could arrive in Boston, Philadelphia, or Chicago within days. Distance stopped being the greatest obstacle. Storage became the new priority. Again, onions held the advantage. While peaches demanded careful handling and strawberries raced against the clock, sacks of cured onions could sit inside freight cars with relatively little concern. Their greatest competitor was no longer spoilage. It was another onion farmer. Competition encouraged innovation. Seed companies began developing varieties for specific purposes rather than simply producing onions. Some were bred for sweeter flavor, others for longer storage, others for uniform size, making them easier to package and sell. Agricultural experiment stations established during the late 19th century studied onions with remarkable seriousness. Researchers investigated fungal diseases, insect pests, irrigation methods, fertilizers, and planting density. Farming gradually shifted from inherited experience toward applied science. Knowledge became another crop. Mechanization followed more slowly. Harvesting onions proved frustratingly difficult because every bulb developed underground. Pull too early, and storage life suffered. Pull too late, and fields became vulnerable to bad weather. Engineers gradually developed machines that loosened soil before workers gathered the bulbs by hand. Later equipment sorted onions by size, cleaned away excess dirt, and prepared them for shipment. Human labor remained essential. It simply became more efficient. Then refrigeration quietly transformed the industry again. Not household refrigerators, rail cars, warehouses, cold storage. Combined with better ventilation, these systems allowed onions harvested in late summer to remain marketable for months. Seasonal shortages became less severe. Markets became more predictable. Consumers began expecting onions to be available almost every day of the year. Expectation changed faster than agriculture. People stopped thinking about harvest seasons altogether. By the early 20th century, onions had become a global commodity. Steamships connected continents. Refrigerated transport crossed oceans. Improved storage reduced waste. International trade expanded steadily as growers discovered new export markets. The onion had traveled the world before. Now it traveled on schedule. The two world wars reinforced its importance. Governments encouraged increased food production, while victory gardens supplied fresh vegetables to millions of households. Onions appeared again in military kitchens, just as they had in Roman camps nearly 2,000 years earlier. History has a habit of repeating itself, especially at dinner. After the Second World War, advances in irrigation, synthetic fertilizers, crop protection, and plant breeding dramatically increased yields across much of the world. The average consumer noticed only one result: onions became cheaper. And as often happens, the cheaper something becomes, the easier it is to forget how extraordinary it once was. By the 21st century, more onions were being harvested than at any other point in human history. Every year, well over 100 million metric tons leave fields across the globe. China and India dominate production, together growing a substantial share of the world's supply. Egypt, Turkey, Pakistan, the United States, Bangladesh, Russia, Iran, and several other countries contribute millions of tons more. One of the world's largest exporters, however, surprises almost everyone: the Netherlands. Despite its relatively small size, decades of investment in agricultural technology, storage infrastructure, and international logistics have turned the country into one of the world's leading onion exporters. Dutch onions reach supermarkets across Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean. The crop that once traveled by donkey caravan now moves inside refrigerated shipping containers tracked by satellite. Nothing about that would surprise the anonymous farmer who planted the first onion. Everything about it would amaze him. The onion has never been more abundant. It has also never been more vulnerable. Not because the plant has changed, because the system around it has. Every year, farmers harvest well over 100 million metric tons of onions. Billions of bulbs leave fields across Asia, Europe, Africa, and the Americas. China and India consistently produce more onions than any other countries on Earth, while nations such as Egypt, Turkey, Pakistan, the United States, and the Netherlands have become major producers or exporters. That sounds like an agricultural success story. It is, until something goes wrong. Unlike wheat or corn, onions are notoriously difficult to price. They cannot simply remain in storage forever waiting for better markets. Every harvest has a deadline. Every grower knows that millions of other farmers are harvesting at roughly the same time. Sometimes success becomes the problem. A perfect growing season can produce a disastrous market. When harvests are exceptionally good across an entire region, supply rises faster than demand. Prices collapse. Farmers who produce their best crop in years can find themselves earning less money than they did after a mediocre harvest. It is one of agriculture's oldest paradoxes. Grow too little and you lose. Grow too much and you might lose anyway. India has experienced this cycle repeatedly. Onions are so important to everyday cooking that sudden price increases regularly become national news. Governments have imposed export restrictions, adjusted import policies, and released onions from public buffer stocks in an effort to stabilize markets when shortages push prices sharply higher. In years of abundant harvests, the opposite problem emerges. Prices can fall so low that farmers struggle to recover the cost of seed, fertilizer, irrigation, transportation, and labor. The same vegetable can become both too expensive for consumers and too cheap for producers. Sometimes within a single year. Water has become another challenge. Although onions require less water than some major crops, they still depend on reliable irrigation during key stages of growth. Across parts of India, the western United States, North Africa, and other water-stressed regions, farmers must increasingly balance onion production against shrinking groundwater supplies and more unpredictable rainfall. Climate adds another layer of uncertainty. Onions respond to day length with remarkable precision. Some varieties form bulbs only during long summer days. Others require shorter daylight conditions. A variety perfectly suited to northern Europe may perform poorly near the equator, while tropical onions often fail in colder climates. Farmers cannot simply plant any onion anywhere. They have to match biology to geography. As weather patterns become less predictable, that task becomes more difficult. Yet despite all the technology surrounding modern agriculture, one part of onion production still looks surprisingly familiar: harvest. Walk through a commercial onion field almost anywhere in the world and you will still see people doing work their ancestors would immediately recognize. Machines may lift the bulbs from the soil, but workers continue sorting, grading, packing, and inspecting onions before they reach warehouses and supermarkets. The crop has become industrial. The work has not become entirely automatic. That is easy to forget when standing beneath bright supermarket lights. Every onion on the shelf has passed through dozens of hands. Someone prepared the seedbed. Someone planted the seed. Someone monitored irrigation. Someone watched for disease. Someone harvested the field. Someone packed the truck. Someone stocked the shelf. Thousands of years separate today's supply chains from those of ancient Egypt. The basic job has barely changed, which brings us back to the man sitting beside the Nile more than 3,000 years ago. He could not have imagined refrigerated shipping containers crossing oceans. He could not have imagined satellites helping farmers irrigate fields. He could not have imagined supermarkets carrying onions from 5 different countries in the middle of winter. But he would have recognized the vegetable. Peel away the modern packaging, the logistics networks, the export markets, and the technology, and the onion itself remains almost exactly what it was when he held it in his hands. That is remarkably rare. Most of the foods filling our kitchens today are the products of centuries of breeding, processing, or industrial manufacture. The onion certainly changed over time, becoming larger, sweeter, and more uniform through generations of cultivation. But it never stopped being an onion. Perhaps that's why it has endured for so long. It never depended on fashion. It never belonged exclusively to kings. It never became so expensive that ordinary people abandoned it. Instead, it quietly earned a place in almost every culture it encountered. Not by being spectacular, but by being useful. History usually celebrates conquerors. The onion conquered kitchens. History remembers emperors. The onion outlived them. History fills museums with crowns, swords, and jewels. Meanwhile, one humble bulb has survived for thousands of years by solving the same problem generation after generation, making ordinary food taste just a little better. The next time you slice an onion and your eyes begin to sting, remember that you are holding one of humanity's oldest companions, a crop cultivated before history was written, carried across deserts and oceans, planted by Roman soldiers, tended by medieval monks, transported by steam railways, and harvested today by millions of farmers whose names history will probably never record. And somehow, after all that time, it is still one of the cheapest things in your shopping basket. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the history of the onion, subscribe for more episodes exploring the extraordinary stories behind the foods we take for granted. And let me ask you this: which everyday ingredient should we uncover next? And what do you think its hidden history might reveal?